Well, it's that time of year again. We're back with Lauren Sheets Jarrell from the American Tort Reform Association. Lauren, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
Always a great resource and great what you and the organization do in terms of alerting us to the judicial hellholes, the worst places in America to be sued. Just kind of overview, Lauren, how do you come up with, or what are the keys that you have for this list?
So we begin gathering information at the start of every year, and we gather it from a variety of sources. We speak with those on the ground, lawyers on the ground. We scour the dockets. We talk to a vast variety of people, and really we look at places where lawsuit abuse is the norm. Where are the outliers, where they're expanding liability in novel ways? They're really following the trial bars, passing their agenda, and just the playing field is stacked against the defendants and tilted against them.
And I guess it depends on the jurisdiction. It can be courts, it can be legislatures, or on the worst of places, the combo of the two.
Exactly. We always look at the court systems first. What are the judges doing? Are they issuing rulings in fair and balanced ways? Are they expanding liability? And then also, what is the role of the legislature? Are they adopting new theories, new private rights of action? How are they playing a role in impacting the state civil justice system?
Lauren, time for the big reveal.
So this year, for the first time in the history of the report, we actually named two co-number one judicial hellholes. We had Georgia, which I believe is on the next slide, and the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas and Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And this was due to some late decisions that were released by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. Georgia was the number one hellhole in 2022 and kept its spot this year, and was joined, like I said, by Pennsylvania. First, starting with Georgia, just some brief reasons behind their number one status. Once again, a proliferation of nuclear verdicts, really targeting the trucking industry as well as some other industries. Phantom damages are allowed by the courts, and they provide windfalls to plaintiffs and their attorneys. The expansion of premise liability. They also allowed third-party litigation financing, which is sort of feeding the litigation machine in the state. I will say that Governor Kemp has expressed that civil justice reform will be a priority in 2024 for his administration. So we're waiting to see what that means. But unless there's some significant changes, Georgia seems to be steadfast at number one. As I mentioned, it was joined by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas. And this is due to litigation tourism that's being allowed in the state. Both the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court has eliminated some really important barriers that prevented defendants from being dragged into these plaintiff-friendly courts that have little to no connection to the underlying case. This is creating a lot of instability and uncertainty for businesses, and it really is burdening the state's court system. There's also an uptick in nuclear verdicts in Pennsylvania, and then there were several liability and expanding decisions issued by the state Supreme Court. And this year in the number 3 spot, we have Cook County, Illinois. This is thanks to a flood of Biometric Information Privacy Act cases. The Illinois Supreme Court issued a few expansive decisions as well that really led to an uptick in those cases. And they're also seeing a new wave of no injury lawsuits under the Genetic Information Privacy Act. So the plaintiff's bar is following same playbook now under that statute. And Cook County is ground zero for nuclear verdicts in the state. A very high percentage of all nuclear verdicts in Illinois are issued by the Cook County Circuit Court. Number 4 is California. They have seemed to embrace their status as a judicial hellhole. I believe they've been featured almost every year of the report's existence. Once again, endless Prop 65 litigation targeting business. They have a unique lemon law that really is a gold mine for plaintiffs' lawyers. Arbitration continues to be under attack both by the legislature and the courts. And there's also a lot of environmental litigation that is being driven by the state AG and other localities. Number 5, we have New York City. Nuclear verdicts continue to really plague there. plague the civil justice system there. They allow anchoring, which is where the plaintiff's lawyers suggest an unusually high damage award, and this becomes the starting point for the jurors, and it's driving up verdicts in the state. We also have seen a lot of no injury litigation, specifically in the consumer protection context and Americans with Disabilities Act litigation as well. And third-party litigation financing is a real issue in New York as well. I will say that following the release of this year's report, Governor Hochul vetoed two really important bills from our perspective. She vetoed one bill that would have drastically expanded the state's wrongful death law, and then she vetoed a personal jurisdiction bill that was very similar to what we've seen enacted, basically identical to what was enacted in Pennsylvania. It would have required any state or any company doing business in the state or registered to do business in the state would therefore give consent to the courts having jurisdiction over them. And she took a common sense approach and recognized the impact that this would have on the state civil justice system and how it would create this instability. And she vetoed the bills. So that's certainly noteworthy to end the year.
Excellent.
At number 5, we have South Carolina asbestos litigation. They've just created this unwelcome reputation for bias against corporate defendants, specifically with unwarranted sanctions, low evidentiary requirements, unfair trials, and really severe verdicts. So we continue to keep an eye on that. And then this year, a newcomer to the list at number 6 is Lansing, Michigan. And this is the first time that Michigan has ever been featured on the Judicial Hellholes list. And this is in large part due to expansive rulings by the Supreme Court. They expanded premise liability and workplace liability. But then the legislature also played a role here as well. They are considering a very pro-plaintiff package of legislation, an FDA defense bill. They retracted the FDA defense at the end of 2023. And then there are several concerning bills that we are paying attention to that will be up again in 2024. At number 7 is Louisiana. Their civil justice system is really plagued by this coastal litigation that continues to drag on with no end in sight. But then there's also insurance claim fraud that we're seeing and manipulation that has been targeting the trucking industry. There's a several years long fraud that they're trying to get to the bottom of. Yeah. And then also much needed transparency legislation around third-party litigation financing was vetoed by the governor. So he has been a roadblock to reforms in the state. He's now no longer the governor. So maybe there will be room for improvement, but we will certainly keep an eye on how things go there. And then finally, to round out the list at number 8, we have St. Louis. Those courts, the St. Louis Circuit Courts, have allowed junk science in a variety of different cases, and they also have an issue with nuclear verdicts. They also allow anchoring, which has led to higher verdicts there. So that's the 2023-2024 list.
There you go. Hey, one of the things you talked about, Lauren, was phantom damage. Into the folks what that is and what we're talking about with that.
With phantom damages, it's when the jury only hears the billed amount and not the amount actually paid. So when you go for medical services, often you get a high amount or that is owed, but that's not what is actually paid or accepted as payment by the hospitals. But the jury doesn't hear the actual paid amount. And so by using that inflated number, that then becomes the basis for multiplying and for non-economic damage awards and creates this windfall.
Excellent. Now, those were the ones who made it. There's a couple on the cusp over here, Lauren?
There are. We have our watch list from this past year. So these are ranked. And so Kentucky is close to becoming a judicial hellhole. We are paying close attention to some intermediate court decisions there to see what how they go. The Texas Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in Dallas, once again, is on the list. This court has really misapplied state precedent and procedures, particularly with regards to discovery, and has required review and reversal by the Texas Supreme Court several times. And then we have New Jersey, and we're paying close attention to what's happening in New Jersey. The trial bar there has really achieved the triple threat. They wield unprecedented power in the state legislature. governor really has no real interest in civil justice reform, so he's not going to veto anything crazy. And then the political balance of the New Jersey Supreme Court has drastically shifted. And the governor is appointing very young justices who could be on the court for years to come. So paying close attention to how the state, what happens with their civil justice system.
Now, there are several topics and trends I think you're going to keep an eye on in 2024. What do you got on that one, Lauren?
So these are sort of the three main trends that we've seen in judicial hellholes this year. So first is the litigation tourism. And this began with a U.S. Supreme Court decision that actually overturned a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision, which is surprising given the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's placement on our judicial hellholes list. And basically in the Mallory case, the court upheld Pennsylvania's statute that required businesses that registered to do business in the state to consent to jurisdiction. And so that's sort of the first barrier that was eliminated. And then the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, in a decision called Hangy, expanded the state's venue rule and basically said you can bring cases in any county that has very nominal percent, that a company does very nominal percent of their business. That's enough to establish jurisdiction.
I think in that case, it was like 0.005% of their entire business. The item wasn't sold in Philadelphia. The accident happened in Philadelphia. And even Philadelphia Common Pleas said it shouldn't be here.
It did. It did. And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court disagreed, sent the case back. And so that's not the first time we've seen them do something like that.
Yeah.
Last year in 2022, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court eliminated the medical liability venue rule. And following that, this past year, we saw almost 100% increase in medical liability filings in Philadelphia. And so we know that this most likely will occur again following this decision. And other states are taking a similar approach. So Georgia Supreme Court has issued a similar decision to the one that U.S. Supreme Court issued. As I mentioned, the New York governor vetoed the personal jurisdiction law or bill this past year. That's the second time she's had to veto such legislation. So hopefully they won't try for a third time. But it's definitely, the plaintiffs' lawyers are trying very hard to bring their cases by any means possible in judicial hellholes because of their pro-plaintiff reputation. And unfortunately, judicial hellholes are making it easier for that to occur.
And the U.S. Supreme Court decision was kind of surprising, disappointing in light of the trend we've seen over the prior two decisions.
It is. And, you had the decision. There's a chance that it'll go back before the court if it takes a different approach.
Sure.
So we will certainly pay attention to that.
Excellent. Hey, nuclear verdicts, something that's always on the front, and particularly the folks in trucking, Lauren.
Certainly.
Keeping an eye on those for this year, where the trends are and where they happen again.
Yes, in our judicial hellholes, we're seeing some of the most eye-popping verdicts anywhere. And a lot of this is due to anchoring, like I mentioned, in states like Georgia, New York, Missouri, where these plaintiffs' lawyers are able to suggest very high damage awards. That's becoming the starting point. It's also due to other things like the reptile theory. And we're seeing those verdicts get driven higher and higher. And it's a very big concern for us.
Area you're keeping an eye on, and we've spoken about this before several times, is litigation financing, litigation funding on this.
Yes, it's becoming a source for what we call the litigation machine, whether it be on the consumer side, these loans with usurious rates that would be usually considered usury under normal context, but because of the non-recourse nature of these loans and the fact that they don't have to be paid back unless they're successful at trial, that's very problematic, and consumers are being taken advantage of. It's a predatory service. And then you also have what's happening with the hedge funds and the investors, and specifically in the mass torts area, where they're just financing mass tort litigation.
Well, on the plaintiff lending side, it's really quite a roadblock in terms of potential settlement of these cases, because the next thing you know, they're underwater.
And in many cases, the defense lawyers, the plaintiff's lawyers, they don't even know about these loans or these loans existing. And so it's a real problem. The courts don't know about it. And just the fact that they're able to charge such high interest rates, in many cases, it's more beneficial for the plaintiff to lose the case than to win for a lesser amount, because they can't then repay their loan.
Lauren, let's, in terms of the end here, closer looks. What we got?
These are additional areas that we took a look at, additional trends that we saw. There's a special section this year on the expansion of wrongful death acts. We've seen a lot of legislation introduced around the country that would expand the acts, who can bring wrongful death litigation, and it's very concerning. We've also seen state Supreme Courts adopt expansive readings of these statutes. And so this section takes a look at that. And then again, litigation tourism, and just judicial hellholes are open for business. However, the cases can find their way there. That's something we wrote about as well.
We used to have a state slogan, Lauren, that says, you've got a friend in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, that's becoming true again for plaintiff attorneys. So
it really is.
Some parts of the state. Sorry,
from the judges.
I interrupt you there.
I was just going to say one thing that we've not mentioned, and I would be remiss for not mentioning, is Florida. So Florida has been a perennial judicial hellhole. They were the #1 hellhole in 2017. They did make their way to the watch list for several years. And this year, they were a point of light, and they were finally removed following the very successful 2023 legislative session. And thanks to the good work of the governor and legislative leadership, as well as the Florida Supreme Court, we were pleased to remove them from the list. We'll continue to keep an eye on them and make sure that, all of the reforms stay intact, and that, common sense continues to prevail. But that was a very important highlight of this year's report.
And shout out to the Florida Trucking Association for their efforts in that regard as well.
Yes.
Lauren, if folks want to know more about this, get in depth,
you can find the full report at judicialhellholes.org.
Excellent.
And
Lauren,
we continue to update the blog throughout the year as there are developments. So please check throughout the year, and then every December we release the updated list.
And one of the other things, I think, you go to the webpage, there are great videos on there, state by state, that give a quick summary, and it's great for those who want to spread the word on this and the need for their particular state as well.
Absolutely.
Lauren, pleasure as always.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.